Masechet Sukkah, Daf 35. We are examining the Mishnah that we left off on 34b at the bottom regarding Etrog and the various things that make it unfit. And these, the ones that are general, but the ones that are particular to an Etrog have to do with it being a fruit. And so we saw that something that is orla, terumat teme'ah, terumat tehora, all those, some of them are pasul, some of them you shouldn't take them, but if you take them, it's okay. Demai is a machloket. And then we got to other items that have a blemish, so it's a chazazit, a boil-like blemish. If it's on most of it, it's no good. If it's on a minority of it, it's okay. These are all the cases we're going to deal with. I'm going to bring sources and reasons for each of them, and many of them have the same reason, and so we can see how it weaves through all of them. So we begin the Gemara at the top of the page. Tenor banan, peri ayes hadad, ayes sheta meso peri shaveh ve'omer ze etrog. So what is an etrog? The Torah just says peri ayes hadad, which if you only had the Torah shebichtav, you'd say, I don't know, any nice fruit, whatever your favorite fruit is. In Nehemiah, we saw it looked like they took olives. However, based on oral tradition, we know it's an etrog, but how does that fit with the pasuk? So we're going to bring a couple of possibilities. So number one, why doesn't the Torah just say peri hadad, a beautiful fruit? Why say a beautiful tree fruit? What's with the word tree? So we answer, it has to be a tree that the taste of the tree and of the fruit is equal. Where do you find such a thing? The etrog. So you can try tasting a twig from the etrog tree. It's a citrus fruit. I don't know if it really tastes the same. There's one commentary that says that what's interesting about the etrog is it has a thick rind. And so the rind, not as so tasty, it was as tasty as the tree itself. Okay, so etrog fits the bill. That's why you would say ayetz. But it's not the only thing that fits the bill. Ve'ema pilpilin. How about pepper? So kedetanya, and we're going to now prove that peppercorn also has this feature that its twigs taste like itself, like the spice. Kedetanya, hayada bi meir omer, bimashmash ne'emar un ta'atem kol ayes ma'achal. This is a pasuk that's regarding orla, and it says if you come to the land untatem kol ayes ma'achal and you plant any fruit tree, any edible tree, then you can't have it for the first 3 years. It may not be eaten. So you see from the context, the rest of the pasuk, that if it says you can't be eaten, and then later on, the 4th and 5th year, then you can eat it, you know it's obviously a fruit tree. So why do you have to say kol ayetz ma'achal? So that's the question. And niodea shu ayetz ma'achal, matamod omad ayetz ma'achal, ayetz shetam etzo pedio shaveh. So we learn the same thing here, that the tree has to be edible, that the tree has the same taste as the fruit. So what is that? What species has that feature? And that's pepper. So now we have another fruit that fits into the peri ayetz hadad, that the bark and the fruit taste the same. Now, in that context, we learned from this that if you plant a pepper tree, I don't know what we call it, pepper bush or tree, then it is chayav in olah. You can't eat it for the first 3 years. Only from the 5th year on. The 4th year is kodesh. So that is true. Even though you might have thought it looks like a bush and maybe it's a vegetable and not a tree. So this Darasha comes to teach you that peppercorn are in fact a fruit, and so the laws of fruits apply to them of orla. We learn an additional side point from here that you see how beautiful Eretz Yisrael. It's a land that's not lacking anything. It even has pepper. Generally, pepper is grown in India, in Indonesia, but it can be grown in some places in Israel. It's good to be self-sufficient and not have to rely on other countries for your spices. Okay, so the point is that we learned here that pepper fits the same bill as peri ayetz hadad. So theoretically, why don't we bring pepper as an alternative instead of an etrog? Be a lot cheaper. Hatam mishum de lo afshar. The answer is it's impossible, right? You're right. According to the Pesukim, it does fit the bill. but it's just not practical. Hechin abid, niktom hada, lamin kera lekichata. They're very small. The peppercorn, what are you going to do? Take one of them and, you have your lav and a little peppercorn in the other hand? You're going to look ridiculous. No one can even tell that you're even holding anything. You want to have a 2, 3 of them, a bunch of them. So then, so someone looks and says, "Oh, I see. Yeah, you're waving the pepper." No, Torah says peri in singular, so it has to be only one. So since it's not practical to bring one pepper, therefore this cannot be the right option, even though it does have the feature of taste. Good. Rabbi Omer. Okay, so that was really the only option we're trying, but now we're going to offer a few other ways of reading the word hadar, and that all point to an etrog. So some of them are more creative. Al tikre hadar ela hadir. Revocalize the word, and doesn't not hadar as beautiful, but rather adir means a sheep pen. So, and how is an etrog similar to a sheep pen? Just like if you go to a pen, you'll see all kinds of animals, adult ones, little child ones, those that are not blemished, they have blemishes, they all live together. So too with etrogim, if you go look on the tree, you'll see some are big and some are small, some are nice and flawless, and some are blemished. Interesting that we're doing here another comparison between etrog and blemishes that have to do with animals and korbanot. Okay, good. So that's what's similar, that you have a diversity all in one place. Hold on, that is true for other fruits as well. I mean, apples, you don't see small ones and big ones, and some that look nice and some have blemishes. No, the point is that they're all on the tree at the same time. Other fruits, they grow more or less uniformly, and you pick them all. If you leave them on the tree, they just rot. So every season has a new crop. Whereas etrog is different. Because its rind is so thick, you can leave it on the tree, even from one year to the next, and it'll stay and just grow more. And so the new ones from the next crop will be little babies, and the old ones from the previous year will be big. So at the same time, you have big ones and small ones. That is unique to etrogim, and that is why peri etz hadir must apply to etrogim. Okay, you see obviously that they probably know etrog was used for many generations, and so now they're reading it back into the pasuk based on what they know that we use already. Rabbi Abahu Amar. Al tikre hadar ela hadar. Okay, this is right. You add a dagesh in the dalet and make it a he hayediah. So not beautiful, but rather that dwells. That the one that is dar, that dwells. You want to find a species that it can remain on the tree from year to year, which is etrog. Another ben azai omer al tikre hadar ela idur. Seems that they didn't always pronounce the gutturals, and it furthermore didn't distinguish between he and aleph. So you can take he and make it idur. Sheken belashon yavani korin lamayim idur. Ve'ezo hi shegader al kol mayim ve'omer ze etrog. Because in Greek we call water idur, right? Which is true. English word water comes from hydra, which we also have, hydroponics. Hydroelectric, that means it comes from the Greek word for water, which is in fact udor. And so this is really fascinating that we can make a derasha based on a Greek sound from the Hebrew Bible, as if the Hebrew somehow contains within it Greek. We should remember that Greek had a special status for the rabbis, that the Septuagint, according to some opinions, you can only translate it into Greek. You can even write a Sefer Torah in Greek, and it's kosher. So it also shows how much Greek they knew, that they automatically make this connection. Okay, maybe actually you don't have to not pronounce the he, because hydra, in some pronunciations, at least in Greek, it could be with the h also. Okay, good. So that's really fascinating. Anyway, what's the point? That it's a hydro plant a tree because the etrog needs a lot of water. So it needs all the water it can get from irrigation, from rainwater. You got to keep bringing it all kinds of water. So it's a very thirsty one. So that applies to etrog. Excellent. So now we get to the next part of the Mishnah, which said, Ashel Ashera v'shel Iran Dachat Pasul. This applied actually to all the Arba Minim, that if it's from an idolatrous tree or from a city that most of the people are following idolatry and is condemned to be destroyed, that's no good. But this is the first time we're actually bringing the source, even though we mentioned it before. Since both the Asherah tree and the city are condemned to be burned, we consider it like it's already burned, and the measurement is crushed. You need a measurement of 3 tefachim at least, or 4 tefachim, or a etrog has to be, right? Remember we saw there has to be some measurement bigger than a walnut, than an egg. And if it's condemned to be burned, we consider it as if it's already not there, it's just ashes. And so the problem is that it doesn't have a proper shiur. Okay, it's a kind of very legalistic explanation. You might just think that, well, you're just not allowed to bring it because avodah zarah. I mean, it's kind of like bringing avodah zarah for a korban. Okay, but anyway, that's the reason here. Veshel ol orla pasul. Okay, now if you have an etrog that growing on a tree during its first 3 years of growth, that is orla. You're not allowed to eat it. You're not allowed to derive benefit from anything that's orla. You can't sell it. You can't burn it for fuel or anything. So what's the reason why you can't use it for etrog? After all, mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu. When you do mitzvah, you're not benefiting yourself. You're doing something for a mitzvah. So what is the reason? My ta'ama pedigi barabi haya barabin v'rabi aseh. So we have 2 Amoraim, and each one said something. We're not sure who said which. It's going to turn out that it follows the right order. The first rabbi, Rabbi Chiya, we're going to see later on, he's the one that says the first opinion, that the problem is because you cannot eat it. So this is interesting. Even though you're not eating the etrog until after the holiday, you make jelly out of it. On the holiday, we're not eating it. Nevertheless, it has to be something that you can eat. Ul kachtem lachem. Lachem doesn't only mean that you have to own it, but it has to be something that you can consume and that you can eat. Otherwise, it's no good. That's the first opinion. The second opinion, which we'll see, is in fact the opinion of Rabbi Aseh, says Lafi she'en ba'din mamon, is because you don't own it. You cannot get any benefit from it, so it has no monetary value. And ulkachtem lachem, it has to be yours. So that's the 2 opinions here. And most of the editions, they are in this order, A, B, and then A, B, although some manuscripts, the order is different. So just because it has this order doesn't necessarily mean that the first one said the first and the second one said the second. It means that we're not sure who said which, and we're going to try to prove who said which one. All right. When we first read these 2 opinions, our assumption is that the one who requires that it can be eaten does not require that you own it. And whereas the one who says you have to own it does not require that you are allowed to eat it. So there are things that are both ways. There are lots of things that you're allowed to own, even though you can't eat. Like most unkosher food you can own, even though you can't eat it. And there are things that are the other way also. So that's what we're assuming right now, and let's test it out. Tenan shel terumat teme'ah pesula. Our Mishnah mentioned on the list that if something etrog is terumah, that means you had a whole harvest of etrogim, and you have to take 1, 2, however many, and give it to the kohen. You designate it as terumah, and it became tameh. Touch something tameh. Now this terumah only a kohen can eat. Terumat teme'ah, no one can eat. A kohen is not allowed to eat terumat teme'ah. He is allowed to burn it for fuel. So let's test this out. This is pasul. Shapir. According to the first opinion above, that says that an etrog that you cannot eat, you cannot use for the mitzvah. So terumat teme'ah cannot be eaten. Therefore, it makes sense why it cannot be used as an etrog. But according to the second opinion that says the problem is only that you don't own it, because it's not has no monetary value. So, but this, right? That's what he said before. However, that regarding orla, but that orla is true. You can't eat it or to get benefit from it. But it's not true for terumat teme'ah. Terumat teme'ah, you can burn it you put it under your pot and use it for fire, and you are allowed to get benefit from it. So therefore, since you can own it, why would you say, and it has value, why do you think that you can't use it for a mitzvah? So that's a question on the second opinion. Therefore, we're going to redefine the machloket up here. Everyone agrees that if you can't eat it, you can't use it for a mitzvah. The only machloket is, do you also require that you own it? Or is it enough that you can eat it, even if you don't own it? So we're circumscribing the machloket. Ki plige bedin mamon, most about heter achila ba'inan, din mamon lo ba'inan. So they only argue regarding owning it. What the first opinion says, you only need to be able to eat it. You don't need to own it. And the second, and the second one says you have to be able to eat it, and it has to have monetary value for yourself. So my benayuk, what's a case where they would disagree with each other? Because in the previous case, those were all not edible. Now we're looking for something that's edible, but that has no monetary value. What is that? Maaser Sheni is when I take my harvest on the first and second and fourth and fifth years, that fruit I have to bring to Jerusalem and eat it in Jerusalem. Now, what is the status? Do I own it? Chachamim say yes, I own it. It's mine. I just have this restriction that I have to eat in Jerusalem. The Rabbi Meir, however, disagrees, and he says Maaser Sheni is like consecrated property. Even though you're not giving it to a Kohen or Levi, you're giving it to yourself. But it's holy. I mean, you can see because you redeem it for money, and that money can only be used if you live far away. Can only be used for Maaser Sheni. So it does, since it's holy, therefore it belongs to Hashem. It doesn't belong to you. It does not actually have monetary value. So if we follow the Rabbi Meir and we say Maaser Sheni does not have monetary value, then this fits the bill. According to the first opinion above, that was more lenient. That was Rabbi Chia. So this can be eaten. You're allowed to eat it. You can share it with your family, with your friends, as long as it's in Jerusalem. So therefore, you can take something that you declared as Maaser Sheni, you can use it as for Etrog of mitzvah. However, according to the opinion that says not only does it have to be edible to you, it has to also have monetary value that's yours. So Maaser Sheni belongs to God. It's consecrated property, does not belong to you, and therefore that would be Aseh, we'll see, would say that if you follow the Rabbi Meir, who says that Maaser Sheni in general belongs to God, then you would not be able to use an Etrog of Maaser Sheni for a mitzvah. Good. Now here's where we find out who says which. Tistayim to be Aseh. Okay, must be the Aseh is the one of those two that says the more Mahmir opinion that you has to have monetary value too. Damar be Aseh. Etrog shel Maaser Sheni lidibrer Rabbi Meir en adam yoseh bo yedei chovato b'yom tov. Lidibrer Chachamim adam yoseh bo yedei chovato b'yom tov. Tistayem. See, it is good that we went through this whole exercise because by realizing the correlation between the Rabbi Meir's opinion and this law, now we can see that Rabbi Meir is in fact this author who says you have to own it because he's the one that made this correlation and says that Etrog of Maaser Sheni, according to the Rabbi Meir, since he's the one that says that Maaser Sheni belongs to God, you cannot use it for a mitzvah. So you see that he thinks that has to have monetary value that you own in order to use it as a mitzvah. According to Chachamim, he thinks that Maaser Sheni is something that you own, just with the restriction of where you eat it. So then even a Aseh would agree that you can use it for a mitzvah because you do own it. Okay, good. So now we solved all those questions, and we see that there is in fact two opinions about all that whole list. Now that we mentioned that Rabbi Aseh, we're gonna quote his full statement, which actually included a couple of other cases. Gufa, Amar Rabbi Aseh, Etrog shel Maaseh Sheni. לדברי רבי מאיר אין אדם יוסף בו ידי חובתו ביום טוב, לדברי חכמים אדם יוסף בו ידי חובתו ביום טוב. That's what we just mentioned already. Rabbi Aseh's opinion regarding Etrog. But now he adds, Masa shel Maaseh Sheni. לדברי רבי מאיר אין אדם יוסף בה ידי חובתו בפסח, לדברי חכמים אדם יוסף בה ידי חובתו בפסח. So he's adding also matzah. This is very interesting, right? That the matzah has to be something that has monetary value that you own, according to the Biaseh. And therefore, if you take maaser sheni, grain, and you make matzah out of it, so according to the Bimeir, because it's maaser sheni and that belongs to God, you cannot use that to fulfill your mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach. Kind of surprising. We never saw this, that you have to own the matzah. We'll bring the source soon. And according to Chachamim, it's fine because you own it. And the third case is Isa shel maaser sheni ledibrer b'meir petura min hachala ledibrer Chachamim chayevet bechala. If you have a large dough, you have to take chala from it. If it's also happens to be maaser sheni, I declared this flour to be maaser sheni, and then I make dough out of it. According to b'meir, I don't have to take chala. Why? Because the whole dough belongs to God. So therefore, I don't have to remove challah and give that to the Kohen, right? And give that symbolically to God, because it already belongs, so it would be redundant. According to Chamim, that same maaser sheni belongs to me. I just have to eat it in Jerusalem. So then, yes, I have to take this part and give it to the Kohen. Okay, good. So that's the three cases. Now let's analyze this. Matkif la'adav papa. Bishlama isad ketib reshit arisot techem. I understand the last case of challah, since it says that your dough, you have to take as challah. If it's not your dough, then you don't have to take challah. So it makes perfect sense. Etrog nameketib lachem, ulkachtem lachem b'yom harishon. Misha lachem. So if it doesn't belong to you, because it's maaser sheni, according to the Bimeir, then I understand it's not yours. Ela masa, miketib masatchem. What is this? It doesn't say you have to take your masa. You can take any masa. Amar Rabba bar Shemuel v'item Rab Yemar bar Shelamya atya lechem ketib hachalechem oni uchtib hatam v'aya be'acholchem milechem haaretz malala mishelachem v'lo mishel maaser afkan mishelachem v'lo mishel maaser. Oh, so he's learning a gezerah shava. Two places where it says the word lechem, so it's going to apply specifically to bread. Masa is called lechem oni. And regarding challah, it says when you go and eat from lechem, from the bread of the land, you have to give a gift of challah. So just like there, it says be'acholchem, and that means it has to be yours and not maaser sheni. So to here, masa has to be yours and not maaser sheni. Okay, this is kind of fascinating comparison. Now, so now we understand all three cases. And let's bring a proof for this, for what the Biaseh said. Here you go. Here's a braita that brings Rabbi Meir, who says that if you have dough that's already maaser sheni, you don't have to bring challah because you don't own it. It already belongs to God. Chachamim say maaser sheni belongs to you, and therefore you have to bring challah. So this should support what the Biaseh said. Now we ask about this. Lema mesayaleh he. What do you mean a support? This is the very source of the whole concept to begin with. I mean, everyone agrees with that about the application between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim regarding maaser sheni. They say it explicitly. Rabbi Aseh's chidush was to say not only in this case but also in two other cases. So this is not really a support. This is the foundation that he assumed already, but before he said this. Rather, what we meant to say when we brought this braita is actually a question, not a support. Our question is, since we know that Rabbi Meir and Chachamim disagree regarding challah, would they apply that also to masa? Or maybe regarding challah, if you look at the Pesukim, actually says your dough twice. That means like it has to really be yours, right? To the extent that if it was Maaseh Sheni, it would be out. Whereas maybe Masah, and even if you have a Gezer Ashava, it's only to one of them, it's weaker, so you own it. But Maaseh Sheni, you also kind of own. I mean, you're the one, you can bring it and you can decide who gets to eat it in Jerusalem. So maybe you wouldn't make that comparison. So Rabbi Yaseh it does make the comparison, but the point is it's not absolutely necessary. It could be that Rabbi Meir would only say his opinion regarding challah. Okay, so that concludes that section. And now we say Shel Teruma Teme'a Pesula. We mentioned this already, but now it occurs in the list. Delet Baheter Achila, because it cannot be, and everyone agrees that if you can't eat it, you cannot use that etrog for mitzvah. Veshel Teruma Tehora Lo Yitol. How about if it's Teruma but it's Tehora? Well, that actually can be eaten by a kohen. Peligi ba'Rabbi Ameh ve'Rabbi Aseh. Chad amar mipnei shemachshira, ve'chad amar mipnei shemafsida. So two options about why teruma tehora should not be used lechatechila. One opinion says because machshira, you are making it susceptible to receiving tuma. Generally, people would put the lulav and hadassim and aravot in water to keep it fresh. And so then you would take it and it's be wet, and then you're holding the etrog next to it, so the etrog is going to become wet. And now tiruma, you're supposed to keep it tahor because it can only be in betahora. You should not do anything that will make it tameh. Now, even if the lulav is tahor and your hands are tahor and everything, you're making it susceptible to tuma, and so that is not a good idea. And that's one opinion. The other opinion says because you're damaging it, you're holding it a lot, and so therefore the peel is going to get dark and dirty, and then the people are not going to want to eat it afterwards. So that's the reason. My benayu, what would be a practical case that would be a difference between them? For example, when you designate teruma, it doesn't have to be a whole fruit. You could designate any part of a fruit. You can say half of this apple will be teruma. So if someone says, I want this etrog to be teruma, but only the inside, not the peel. So then only the inside is teruma. So that would be a difference. According to the one who says you're making it susceptible to impurity, if impurity touches the outside, it's going to make the entire etrog tameh. So then you still should not use it. However, according to the one who says you're only damaging the outside, the peel. And if the peel is not teruma, so then there's no problem with that. You're not damaging the inside. So then you can use it lechatechila. Okay. However, the teruma tehora, if you used it, you fulfilled your mitzvah. According to the opinion above, Rabbi Chia, who said if it's not edible, then you can't use it. Well, this is edible. A kohen can eat it because it's tahor, even though it's teruma. So then there's no problem. According to the one that says it has to have monetary value, it does have monetary value, right? The kohen can take it and he can derive benefit from it. He can sell it. And therefore, it has both things, and therefore, b'di'avad, you can use it. So terumat tehora really is usable, perfectly usable for the mitzvah. It's just that we say it's a good idea not to use it for side reasons, just to protect its status as terumah. But there's no deoraita pesul for using it as a mitzvah. Okay, now interesting one, shel demai. Demai that you receive from an It's a regular farmer, and you're not sure of its status, was Teruma Maaser taken from it or not. So my Tama de Bet Hillel says you can use it for a mitzvah vetrog. Kevan de ibaim mafkar lehun nechseha ve'ani ve'chazileh. Hashtinameh lachem karena be. Bet Hillel says in general, Ditnan machidin ta'aniyim demai ve'tachsenai demai. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Demai that says, according to Bet Hillel, if you acquire demai, you're not allowed to eat it. If you're just a regular person, middle class person, you can't eat it. You have to take to the ma'aser first. However, if you're a poor person, or if you're giving it to a poor person, or you're giving it to some soldiers in those days would come and take residence in a place, and you have to feed them. So even if they're wealthy, but they're far away from home, so they're like poor people. Bet Hillel says you are allowed to feed demai to poor people. And therefore, there is a possibility of it being eaten. Theoretically, you can make yourself poor. You can give up, declare ownerless all of your property, and then you'll be poor, and then you can eat it. So you don't actually have to do that, but since you can do that, it already applies to lachem. You own it, and therefore Bet Hillel says you can use demai. Bet Shammai, ani lachil demai. According to Bet Shammai, even a poor person cannot eat demai. Nobody could eat demai. Therefore, it's unedible. And we said before, if it's not edible, then it cannot be used for a mitzvah. The next line, Ditnan en machin etanim demai ve'etan demai, does not actually appear in the Mishnah. And this seems to be a false repetition of the Mishnah that we quoted up here for Bet Hillel. So because there's a repetition here that doesn't make any sense. Here I'll show you. Rav Huna added Tana. He has a braita that where the braita says Bet Shammai omrim en machlin aniyim achsanaim demai, or Bet Hillel omrim machlin aniyim demai ve'et achsanaim demai. So the braita is the place where it explicitly says Bet Shammai is stringent and says you cannot give demai to poor people, and Bet Hillel says you can give demai to poor people. So if the Mishnah already said it, wouldn't make any sense to quote it in a braita. In fact, the Mishnah does not say both opinions, only says the Bet Hillel's opinion, and you'll see it in manuscripts, it does not have this whole lengthy second quote of the Mishnah. So if you read it that way, right, Bet Hillel says, and quotes the Mishnah, and then Bet Shammai says you can't skip this, and Rav Huna said, then now he's quoting what the source for Bet Shammai. Then it reads more smoothly. Okay, good. So now we understand about demai, why according to Bet Hillel you can take it, because theoretically you could make yourself poor and then you could have it. Now, shel ma'aseh sheni she'birushalayim. All right, we already discussed this case. I like how the Sukkah kind of gives all the theoretical structure, all the rules, and then goes back and applies them directly. Lemanda ma'avnei machshira, hare machshira. Lemanda ma'avnei mafsida, hare mafsida. So ma'aseh sheni also should not become tameh. So according to the one who says that you are preparing it to become tameh, you're making it susceptible. So here too, it's a problem. That's why you should not use maaser sheni. Maaser sheni is what you give to a Levi. Now, according to the one that says you are ruining the peel, so that would also apply here, that you're ruining the peel, then you're going to give it to the Levi. He's going to say, what is this disgusting etrog? I don't want to eat that. So both opinions, both reasons apply. And that's why lechetechila, you cannot take, maaser sheni. This is not Levi. This is that you would take it yourself, but you're supposed to eat it in Jerusalem. So you should keep it tahor, and you want to keep it edible and nice. So therefore, both of the reasons apply. So no matter which one, you should not take it lechatechila. V'im natal keshera b'diavad. If you did take it, it's okay. Why? Lemanda ma'avnishen b'heter achila dibra kol. Lemanda ma'lefi she'en ba'din mamon hamane rabanan hi. If the only problem above was a bichiyah, that has to be edible, so maaser sheni obviously is edible. You take it to Jerusalem, and anybody can eat it there. According to the one that says that it has to be owned, so who is the author of this Mishnah? Ubi Rabbanan, who thinks that maaser sheni you would do in fact own, and it would not be to be meir, because he thinks that maaser sheni belongs to God and not yours. So he could not be the author of this section of the Mishnah. Good. Now we get to the next part of the Mishnah, which is blemishes. Alta hazazit, some kind of boil-like blemish. On most of it is not good. On a minority of it is okay, was what the Mishnah said. Amar Rav Chisda, davar zeh Rabbeinu hagadol amaro, hamakom yeh be'azro. We saw this phrase before, right? Rav Chisda says the following, the great rabbi says. When he says the great rabbi, he's referring to Rav. who would have been much older than him. And so this is a tradition he remembered from Rav, and he gives a blessing, right? May the omnipresent be of his assistance. So, this is a nice introduction to the next halacha, which is Lo shanu ela b'makom echad. This Mishnah that says that blemishes on most of it make it unfit, that's only if they're concentrated in one place. That's when it's no good. But if in 2 or 3 places, then it's okay. Perhaps because here's a picture. Maybe it's not as noticeable if it's, because you only see one side at a time. So some is here, some is there. So if it's spread out, even if it's on the majority of it, it's okay. That's the first version of the statement. Okay, if you remember, we saw this exact wording before regarding the hadas and the berries on it, right? As in one place or in multiple places. So it makes you wonder, did Rav really say this on both, or did he say it only on one, and the Gemara is applying it to both cases? I think it's more likely he only said it in one case and applying it to both cases. I feel like it's more germane to this context, and then it was applied also as a principle. Once you say a principle, you say, oh, this principle makes sense there also. So then you might quote it in another place, even if that sage didn't actually say it regarding that context, only in this context. Okay, so I think that's what happened here. Anyway, so it should be the opposite. If it has these blemishes in many places, that is even worse, because then it looks like it's speckled. And that's not nice at all. At least if it's concentrated in one place, it would be better. So this doesn't make sense. At least the way you remember it doesn't make sense. You know what? Maybe it's actually talking about the sefa of the Mishnah, the part that's lenient, that says, al mi'uto kasher. If you have blemishes, just a minority of it, it's okay. And on that, Amar Rav Chisda, davar ze Rabbeinu Hagadol amaro, b'makom yeh be'azro, lo shanu ela b'makom echad, we only learned that the law, that if it's on a minority, we're lenient. That's only if the minority of the blemishes are all concentrated in one place. So it's a minority and in one place, then it's okay. But if it's spread all over 2 or 3 places, even if it's just a minority, then that is speckled and it's pasul. So that's very interesting, because in the original quote, the Lo Shanu was actually making it more stringent, more lenient, and here we're making it more stringent, right? By putting it on the Sefa. The Sefa said, if it's in the minority, here we could look at the picture together with this. So in this picture, you see it's in the minority. It's only a small amount of spaces that have a blemish. But if it was all in one spot, that would be okay. But now it's in many spots. You look around at it, this is speckled, and that is no good. So you see it's actually for stringency. Okay, it's pretty interesting that after you have this whole introduction, right? We're not actually sure what it applies to. That happens with these Lo Shanu statements, that they are remembered independently and without full confidence of what it was, which word of the Mishnah it was referring to. Okay, Amarava kol ve'al chotamo afilo b'mashehu name pasul. So Rava says, if it's on the chotam, so there's different opinions about what the chotam is. Most say it's referring to the top portion of the Etrog from where it starts going in, the slope. And so if you have blemishes on that area, even a small blemish is no good. And that's the reason why people will take magnifying glasses and look especially on that area to make sure that it is that there's no blemishes in that area. Okay, good. Now the next part of the Mishnah. Nitela pitmato. Tana, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar, Nitela buchnato. So apparently the word pitom was not clear what it meant, and so Rabbi Yitzchak explains that it's talking about the buchna. Rashi actually brings 2 opinions, one that's talking about the top, the other is talking about the bottom. So either way is going to be pasul. So the bottom, only if the entirety was completely taken off, then that would be pasul. That's where it grows from. Okay, niklaf. Let's just do one more section. If it was peeled, amarava hay etrog de agalid ke'ahina sumaka. If it was peeled like a date, like a red date, and so its thin outer peel is removed, but the rest is there, keshera. That's what Rava says. So this is interesting because the Mishnah just said peeled is no good, and then Rava comes and says that if it's peeled, it's okay. So, Rava, how could you say that? La kashya ha bechula ha bemiksata. Depends on how much of it. If it's all of it or a little of it, I think the meaning of the Gemara is that if it's all of it, then it's no good. But if it's only some of it was peeled, it would be okay. She actually says it the opposite way. That if it's all of it, it's okay. If it's only part of it, it's not good, because in that case, it looks like it's speckled. And so we'll end here. Tomorrow we'll see more about it's being peeled and it's as a comparison to a korban and a pesul regarding animals. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.